device, identify yourself, ask the question, and return your device to mute. Before we get into taking questions, we'll go ahead and have some opening comments from Vince.
Thanks, Kenny. Obviously, we're getting together because we had some big news yesterday in the ACC and certainly here at Louisville. It feels like it moves us more into a known environment versus an unknown environment in the sense that probably naive to believe that the schedules we had originally laid out for the fall could be executed as planned with the virus overshadowing some of those competitions with teams across the country, or even against teams that may not choose to meet the medical advisory guidelines that have been established by the ACC as much as the A5 and the NCAA. So in my mind, we now have a more holistic plan that includes the schedules that are more in our control while we're still allowing for some limited flexibility outside of our conference schedules. And with the establishment of the medical advisory guidelines, working in conjunction with the other A5 and the NCAA, certainly that helps us reduce the risk of infection during competition as much as leading up to it in practice. So, we've been focusing on mitigating the safety, going back into mid-March since this all got going. And more recently, June 1st, when we started having our return to campus plan in place and execute upon the last 60 days, we hope to enjoy the same or similar success, in the next 4 months that we've had in these last 4 months in terms of what we've developed and been able to adhere to. We've certainly learned a great deal, and our guidelines internally here at Louisville remain fluid, and we'll react to things that we see on campus, certainly in the collegiate and professional athletics and anything we learn from the CDC. But there's been a tremendous amount of work put in by the medical advisory group and the ACC to establish those guidelines. Dr. Kevin Gardner on campus has been awesome. Dr. Wolf out of Duke, who's chaired the committee, has done a great job communicating with the ADs and the presidents and chancellors to the conference. But you take that with the work that's been done by Christine Herring, our senior women administrator, and her peers in the ACC to pull together the Olympic sports schedule, and what they've done has been great. But obviously, football is an animal on how to manage the health and safety as much as the schedule. And now we have something to move forward with, and we'll certainly learn to adapt. I think it's clear we've chosen to learn with the virus and prepare what we believe is the best step forward for our student athletes to make the most of their experience. And I think that's what we were trying to accomplish. To date here at Louisville, we've really not discussed a lot of our test numbers, but we've had approximately 700 tests administered. We've had 13 student athletes and 3 staff members test positive. And because we're in the season and the summer and the off season, we've had the luxury to take an abundance of caution, and we'll continue to do so with those protocols. So we paused 2 sports along the way. Men's basketball, if we were in season, it's probably debatable whether we'd have done that. Just we had time and there was no rush. And I think the one thing that, we continue to educate our student athletes and our staff, but our student athletes see these daily numbers that are produced by the state. There's only been 1 death in the state of Kentucky under the age of 30, and I think it provides them more courage than it does to me at 54, that's for sure. But we continue to talk to them about that. But one thing I would say is I'm not naive to believe that a vaccine shows up January 1st and all of a sudden we return to normal. And I don't think our student athletes are either. But, when I see some of the comments across media where student athletes are discussing a red shirt or considering whether this schedule and competition may or may not meet needs, I'd also warn that there's no definitive end to this virus. We could be facing the very same thing this time next year. There's just no guarantees. But it's clear they want to compete, and they've worked hard this summer, and I think we remain excited to compete. This news probably gives them more than known as well. They probably had their own doubts. So, with that said, if they don't feel safe and elect not to compete, then we'll deal with that on a case-by-case basis. We certainly have expectations of them to keep themselves and our athletic department staff safe, and they have expectations of us to do all we can to keep them safe, and I think we're doing that today. By the read of some of the media reports where athletic teams have had to pause it, there's one thing that seems to be a clear message, that the no large social gatherings apply to campus parties hasn't totally registered yet. Certainly saw one of the Big Ten teams announce that yesterday, where they had a number of football members, related to a social, a gathering, if you will, a party. Yesterday's news really provides us a lot of hope going forward, and I think we're committed more than ever to make that schedule play out as planned, and we'll adjust along the way as warranted. But on the football front, I would tell you that I'm happy we can make something work with Notre Dame, and greatly appreciate Jack Swarbrick, their AD's commitment to a amicable solution that I think works best for all parties. Now we got to get the work to get dates put together with the opponents on the schedules for all these sports, not just football. And then as for our fans, they're going to have a lot of questions. We know we developed a microsite on our gocards.com website, gocards.com/2020, and we're going to continue to upload all the information we can there, the schedules, ticketing information, and all that we can as we learn it, and we'll lay it out. Most of the ACC schools had a plan around August 1st to talk about what their ticketing plans were for football. I think this avails us a little more time to release that. So that'll probably be the next bit of news that we'd have a press conference on, maybe a couple weeks down the road. In the state of Kentucky, where, right now, as you can see with Louisville City FC, the pro soccer, they're allowed up to 50%, but filling about 30% of their capacity, with social distancing in place. And, we'll work to consider that and see if there's anything new that's unveiled on that front over the next couple weeks. But with that, certainly open to take some questions at this point.
Vince, Russ Brown, Kentucky Today. Do you have any idea yet when you will be opening and against who in football?
No, we don't. That's to come. I think once we got the opponents, in our plan, first you had to figure out whether we were going to go with the 10+1 or some other schedule, and laying out who we would play. Now it's going to be laying out the dates, and I think some of that too will. Since we're in a +1 situation, we'll reach out to the potential other opponent for us. For us, we had Murray State, Western Kentucky, and Kentucky on the schedule. SEC may dictate whether we get to play Kentucky or not. But if not, if they can fit us in their schedule, and they can meet the medical guidelines and they're candidates to be played. If they can't, then we'll look for another school to fill that role.
Vince, this is David Teal with the Times-Dispatch in Richmond, Virginia, and I'm curious, ACC prepared to move forward with football and/or the fall Olympic sports, no matter what the NCAA Board of Governors might decide on Tuesday?
Well, I think we're going to, we'll take it into consideration. I would say that we know the Board of Governors meeting is coming up on August 4th. Not knowing where they're going to go, I've certainly been attentive to Mark Emmert's comments. It feels like he took a half step back forward last week in comments related to with a more thoughtful schedule. I can't remember his exact words, David, but he did make a notion that, thinking about the schedule and the time frame of that schedule might make it more interesting for consideration. That's a tough one for the NCAA because they're talking about Division I, II, and III. And whether they have the wherewithal and gumption to abide by the medical guidelines, I think is going to be the first thing in that consideration. But if they so choose, we had this same thought in the spring when the NCAA canceled the winter and spring sport championships. At that point, we didn't know much about the virus, really didn't have anything in play. So I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation if the NCAA decided to cancel fall championships. I think there's going to be a much more thoughtful discussion about moving forward, knowing how hard everybody's worked on their preparation on the safety side.
Thank you.
Hey, Vince Cameron from the Courier Journal. What made this model, the 10+1 model, the scheduling model you think the ACC really wanted to go with other than maybe the 8+1 or conference only?
Yeah, I think we had that consideration, much like other conferences are probably doing and the SEC is probably doing today. But this is the one that got the most traction with ADs for sure. Clearly, it moved forward to the presidents for their decision. I think the +1, if it happens, that the SEC is aligned with us in that way, because a lot of us have in-state rivalries. I know Clemson, South Carolina, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State, and us with Kentucky. I think that +1 availed the opportunity to maintain those. And I think it worked within the notion that we were looking at some home games, and would with the SEC if it worked out that they fulfilled some of those. Kentucky was scheduled to play us at home. So we'll see if that works out. But I think others were also thinking about, if there's weeks that are lost along the way, how many games would we want to have the calendar, and what's the right time frame to do that? As you can see, we've got 11 games over the 13-week period.
Vince,
Yeah.
Rick Moses should WDRB. If it isn't Kentucky, are Western and Murray candidates to be that +1 team, or are you looking more for a Power 5 opponent?
I think we're hope Bellarmine starts a program by the fall. No, I mean, honestly, that would be ideal. I mean, I think, Coach Satterfield has a similar mentality that Coach Mack does, that they love to play great competition. And I think that, those opportunities, Rick, become less as the Big Ten made their decision and the Pac-12. If the SEC goes conference only, you're talking about the Big 12 in terms of, a team inside the A5. So I think it becomes tricky to figure out how to get that done, but we're certainly open to it.
That's Tim Sullivan from the Courier-Journal. I'm interested in the negotiations with Notre Dame and their willingness to share their television revenue, or the right word, but that they ultimately did. Can you give us a little glimpse into how that went down and whether you think this portends them possibly giving up their independent status down the road?
Yeah, well, obviously I wasn't in all of that. Jack and I are close enough to talk about things, but I think inside the AD meeting, Jack was pretty open about their desire and interest to play the ACC schedule. He was also forthcoming about that, all too secretive NBC deal, and that those economics would have to be part of it. I don't think we would have had much of a conversation if that wasn't a part of the deal. And so the economics, I think bringing the NBC in certainly makes it work for the other members of the ACC. We obviously contemplated the one division, which avails them a chance as well to play for the ACC championship, which I think was another nice enticement for them. I think as far as looking ahead, this is a nice trial balloon to certainly launch with Notre Dame playing in the conference. They've had a lot of traditional rivals that they played over the years, and Navy and Army and USC and a variety of others, but times have changed and economics dictate quite a bit. And I think with what's happening in TV deals and so forth, it'll be interesting in years to come whether this test model becomes a great case study for them to consider. We'd certainly be interested in them doing that.
Thank you.
Brett Calgill with WLKY. Have you guys thought about like a worst case scenario that you're 3 or 4 weeks into this season and suddenly there are positive tests with one team having played another team? It creates a domino problem, kind of like what baseball went through with the Marlins. Do you get your arms around that, and what do you do?
Yeah, I think we've had to think about that. I think you do allow yourself a couple bye weeks. I think you've also had to think about what if someone were to lose a game in conference? What if someone only plays 9 games versus 10? And how do you go about that in terms of, a tiebreaker? So there's been a lot of thought around it. The good thing about football is you play once a week. Major League Baseball plays 5 times a week in different cities, and it's hard to make that same comparison. If a player contracted the virus and we had to quarantine them, it's unlikely they're going to miss 2 games, right? I mean, the schedule would have to be, the timing would have to be awkward. And the thing we've seen with the test I mentioned is only about 1/3 of them showed any symptoms. The other ones were just caught in the test and were asymptomatic. So the CDC guidelines have become, a little more, I don't want to say liberal, it's probably a strong word, but in this case, but if you're testing positive, you'll see in the guidelines to come, you're not going to be tested over and over with the rest of your teammates for probably a period of a few months. So it's really, you're thinking about they would miss a game, and we deal with this. We deal with injuries. We dealt with it last year. Everybody keeps coming to me asking about what if it hits your quarterback. Well, Puma Pass was injured right away last year, and we went without him. Mikhail Cunningham became injured. We went down to Evan Conley, who did terrific, and Tutu was our backup as a wide receiver. So, you deal with this in football with injuries and different things. This is they're going to go on the injured reserve list for a different reason, not an ankle sprain, but potentially the virus. And I don't want to downplay it. It's a serious thing here, but it's something we have to think about how we're going to deal with in terms of how to get this schedule fulfilled.
Hey, Vince, Mark Story, Lexington Herald Leader. If you're not able to play Western and Murray, what are the financial ramifications of that? And do you feel any special need to make them whole because they are in-state schools too?
Yeah, I mean, we're just getting into that, as you can imagine. We obviously have game contracts. There is language in there for protection. In the same vein, we don't know if we're going to play one of them or not. As you can imagine, the SEC meetings that are going on, I think as we speak, will dictate that, and then we'll see if they can meet the guidelines of the conference. But you do have contract language related to epidemics in there. It's going to be a gray area for people to deal with, but we've gotten a lot of guidance from our own council, but particularly the conference council is the Big Ten and ACC are now dealing with it, and other conferences. It's going to be a systemic issue that I'm sure we're all going to be dealing with. It's unfortunate, as you can imagine, but it's one we'll be dealing with. So I wish I could give you a more clear answer today, but we hadn't even gotten into those discussions.
Hey, Vince Cameron again from the Courier Journal. These bye weeks, normally when you get a schedule, your bye weeks are set and you really can't move them. How much flexibility do you guys have with these bye weeks? And when you think when you get dates for the schedule, do you think they will be set in specific weeks to break things up?
Yeah, that I haven't seen yet, so I can't give you a concrete answer on other than when the idea that you have 10 of these 11 games are within your control in the conference. It's provides you some flexibility if you have a quote unquote makeup date. It may not be available though. That's why we have to consider whether if everyone doesn't get their conference games completed, if they have 9 instead of the 10, where do they fall in terms of the pecking order for making the ACC championship?
Vince, Tim Sullivan again. What is your overall level of optimism that you're going to be able to have a normal season or a quasi-normal season, given the virus and all the uncertainty it brings?
I have a high level of optimism around a quasi-normal season, to use your words. No, Tim, we're going into this one. I will tell you this, I feel a lot better today with what we've laid out for all these sports than I felt a week ago. I really did. I just think that the idea of traveling across country or some of the schools, the non-conference schools' ability to be prepared to play and meet the expectations was going to be a chore. So I think that's why I say I had some level of conviction. It was low that we were going to be able to pull off across all these fall sports. And I think that the changes we've made here are pretty thoughtful and give us a much better chance of trying to complete, I'll say, quote unquote, full schedules. They may not seem so full when you talk about 6 field hockey conference games, and then we'll add in some non-conference to give more competition. But I do have some optimism, really do. I'm pleased with what I'm seeing in the way the other ACC schools are handling their testing protocols and return to campus. I feel like we're closer to uniformity going into August than we were going into June when kids were returning to campus. And that makes me feel better in terms of all of us being on the same page, and that's incredibly important.
As a follow-up unrelated, do you think that yesterday's announcement forces the SEC's hand at all? Are they kind of playing defense at this point?
I haven't seen the SEC play defense very often. I don't know that I say they're doing that today. I think every conference is doing what they think is best for them. I think we went in with our decision. We're certainly aware of decisions that were made by the Pac-12 and the Big Ten, but ours was different. I think every conference is thinking about it related to their own conference, and they're going to be very similar. whether they decide to go with non-conference or all conference, I think it's still going to look very similar when it's all said and done.
Vince, Fred again. Do you have a sense of when you're going to have a full schedule in front of you? I mean, is it a couple of weeks away, or what's your feel for that?
Yeah, that's a great question that I wish I could answer better. You can imagine that's a question from all the ADs, but it's going to be based upon going back to Mark's question around, Murray State or Western or Kentucky. I mean, all that till we can sort out their schedules and whether they could still meet our schedule, our timelines is going to be, I mean, that's a real puzzle piece, for Michael Strickland at the conference office to put together with the ADs and our deputy ADs. Josh Hurd will be working on that for us. I would think at minimum you're probably out maybe those couple of weeks.
Vince, this is David Teal again. How have you found the testing infrastructure there in Louisville in terms of the turnaround time on tests? Because the ACC is suggesting a Wednesday test for a football team that's playing on Saturday. Have you found you can turn it around in that time?
Yeah, now David, in Louisville, we're very fortunate with the UofL health system. So, we've got the tester here. We have access to test, and we're getting turned around in 4 to 6 hours. So wow. I know we're unique to the conference. I know in some of the hot spots where testing is a bit different, we are getting them turned around pretty quickly. Doing the PCR test, obviously up the nasal cannula, and so today, I'm not saying that testing materials couldn't become tight if the virus isn't contained, but today we're in a pretty good spot. But I think all the conferences are thinking about how to handle that for the conference members that don't have that. We know some of them don't in the ACC, but I think we're all on board trying to find a lab that would work for everyone.
Russ Brown again. Vince, where do you stand on your planning for the fans? Your considerations?
I mean, we obviously, that's one we felt like we could hold out as long as we could. And as noted, that's one of the reasons we created our microsite for fans to go to. But it still feels like that, once we get the schedule out, I think that's one thing. I think we'll probably announce our fan plan, if you will, with some of the other initiatives we have at the stadium with the full schedule all at the same time. So I would think once we get the dates pulled together, I think it'll be appropriate to try to hit a number of things in a spirit of efficiency for you as much as me, that we talk about the fan plan, the schedule, and then some enhancements we're doing at the stadium on behalf of the fans.
Do you have,
Vince,
a lot of plans you're considering? Are you down to 2 or 3 or what?
No, I think they've become narrowed. Like I mentioned earlier, Louisville City FC has been a great model for us to look at locally because, different state and local governments vary on their field. But, today with their 50% capacity plan, but they're probably operating, like I said, it seems to be around 30%. That may end up being something we fall in line with if that's where we are. We have the terrace we could think about doing some other things with, but I think in the spirit of time, in fairness to the fans, I would think we'll probably be in a couple weeks have that answer and give us 30 days before kick.
Vince, this is Tyler Graver from WHAS. Going off of the test result question from a couple questions ago, I know the ACC is requiring weekly testing for football, but is leaving additional testing up to the university's discretion. At this time, do you all plan any additional testing for football players beyond once a week, or is that something that hasn't been decided yet?
No, I think we're beyond that. We're looking at symptomatic testing, much like we're doing with the other sports. So, the only thing I would say is if they tested positive and they come out of quarantine, there's not a current CDC requirement or recommendation, I should say, that we test them in the following 90 days. So they would drop out of the following week's test.
Vince, Cameron again, when you look at the schedule and kind of how you guys are planning it, was it really based on regionally? So really you guys cut down a lot of travel and where a lot of these teams are going?
Significantly. We spent a lot of time around the travel and you looked at a radius. we talked about what would be the right radius. We tried to minimize the number of trips in the air and how many could be by bus. We're in a different spot because, we're not going to fit many mileage radius. If you say 200 or 250 or 300, whatever, we don't really have that. We have Notre Dame, the closest one. But for us in Miami, schools like that, Syracuse, we're going to be on a plane. For the bulk of the schools in the belly of the conference, they have the ability to be on buses. And I think when we looked at the Olympic sports, I may be wrong, but I think we moved from around 90 flights to around 25 flights by moderating the schedules that you see for Olympic sports, and that was pretty significant.
Vince,
Vince, Jody,
follow up to that
both-
really quick. Is that a cost cutting measure or a coronavirus related measure?
No, if it was cost cutting, we'd have done it years ago. I mean, it starts with COVID, and it's a safety one, not a cost cutting.
Vince, Jody Demling with Cardinal Authority. Talking about the Olympic sports, you mentioned a couple questions ago that you could add some non-conference games. Is there any idea like how many you could add, or is that up to the school's discretion as you move forward?
It'll be up to the schools. I think we've talked about that in general in our meetings, but I don't know that we'll have exactly as many as we have played historically in men's and women's soccer. You got to remember, Jody, that you're going to be limited by those that can meet the medical guidelines. So I think that's the first hurdle. The second is whether they fit in the schedule. So if men's soccer wants to try to play, locally, play some of the schools in the area, Western or Butler or whoever it might be, I'm sure they'll be in contact. But we'll be looking at more bus trips. Not too dissimilar to what we women's basketball pulling back off of some trips and playing Cincinnati later this year.
Vince Rosich again. I know that you guys just settled the football thing, but you just mentioned basketball. Has there been any discussion yet on whether basketball will be able to start on time?
We have not discussed basketball yet.
Vince, Fred again. Is there a natural concern for those road games you're going to have that you're going into hot spots that, Kentucky's been blessed by comparison. We're pretty low. You're going into places at times that might be exponentially more infected, for lack of a better expression or term. Does that worry you?
It does, and I think that's why we put the policies in place that we have. And I think there'll be some consideration. It's clear that Miami's a hot spot, Boston's a hot spot, not to pick on those cities, but they're aware of that too. We're hopeful that there'll be some progress in those cities as we move along. But you may let's take football for example. You may decide just to fly on game day rather than spend the night in a hotel in the city. I think everybody has to do what they think is best for them as it relates to the safety aspect of it. So we're already making significant adjustments to the fall as we are now and what we've done this summer. I think it's just going to require more thoughtful decisions.
Vince, this is Lewis at WOP. Are you concerned at all with maybe some of the Olympic sports athletes wanting to take a red shirt because they may think, well, I'm only going to play 6 conference games?
Yeah, I think that some may say, that maybe that doesn't meet their desire, but I think you just can't take this for granted. I guess the thing I would, and I said this today in our AD meeting, and I think everyone shook their heads when they thought about it is, I've thought about it. I just don't know there's any guarantee this is gone this time next year. I'd love for it to be gone. We all would, but I don't want to take anything for granted that, just the idea we can shift schedules or they can redshirt and things like that. And I certainly saw the announcement with Arizona State redshirting their swim team. And, I don't know, it seems those are interesting decisions. I think you got to deal with them on a case by case basis, but we want to provide them enough of an experience that they say that works. And if we can't, my guess is the good old NCAA is going to probably provide them a lot of, ability to exercise some rights related to another season of eligibility like they did in the spring or whatever. I hate to speculate too much on that, but, COVID waivers are pretty easy to come by these days.
Vince, you may have seen that the Indiana University Healthcare took a position yesterday opposing spectators at the Indianapolis 500. Are you getting any pushback from the medical community about whether you should have fans at all?
No, we've yet, to be honest, Tim, I haven't received anything of note from fans or the medical community, and maybe it's because we're involved with the medical community. We brought in very early back in March. I engaged locally. We have Norton Healthcare that helps support our, which helps us support. So we brought in their group right away. We had a medical advisory group on campus before there was an ACC one. So maybe it's because we were involved with public health and infectious disease and the research so early in the process that I think there's enough knowledge in the community of steps we're trying to take related to the stadium as much as to the athletes.
Vince, hey, it's Jody again. Is the start of football camp affected at all by this, or are they set still for next week?
We'll start on Tuesday.
Vince, Cameron again. Obviously, there's some states that have travel advisories where if people travel to a different state, they have to quarantine for 14 days. Kentucky has that with some states, but if they were to expand theirs to, say, Massachusetts or even Georgia, have you guys thought about that? Like, would the players have to quarantine for 14 days, or how would that work within the conference?
I think you'd have to, my guess is you're going to have to apply to each individual state for some type of waiver for that to go on, and you're going to have to show evidence of what you've done. They're certainly not throwing that fishing net out to catch those that are abiding by strict guidelines and policies like us. I think we're all aware of where there's vacation hotspots where maybe the guidelines aren't being followed as closely as all would like, but I don't think the intention is to grab this, but I don't want to be naive to believe that we shouldn't go through the proper steps with those organizations to get their approval.
Take a couple more for Vince, anyone.
Hey, Vince, it's Mark in Lexington again, and this is a completely hypothetical question, but if there is no Kentucky-Louisville football game in 2020, will your position be that UK owes you a game in 2021, or would the
We're going to
contract?
take it as a forfeit. No, Mitch and I talk about a lot of these things pretty comfortably, so I'm sure we'd get back on the phone and work it out. It would definitely, assuming everything goes well with basketball, it'd be be unusual that we'd be now counter years because we've been fortunate in our rivalry that we have football and basketball played in the same city each year, and it would potentially break it up. But I'd hate to speculate. I'd have to talk to Mitch about it, but I don't foresee any issue there.
Last question. All right, hearing none, that will conclude today. Vince, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.
Stay with us. Thanks for everybody joining us. Just one note, we had Carly Jones scheduled for 2 o'clock today. We moved that to 3 p.m. just because of a workout change. So we'll see some of you again a little bit later today.
Thank you, Kenny.
Thank you all. Okay.
Thanks, Kenny.
Thank you. Thanks, Vince.